Owen Coyle Jr. Am I right in calling you that?
Yeah, junior, or just Owen Coyle, whatever your preference is. Probably about 4 or 5 years ago I decided to take the junior out and just go as Owen Coyle, but obviously can bring up its own challenges and cross wires at different points, but I appreciate you having me on.
How's things for you in terms of your coaching? How's it gone so far?
Yeah, it's going really well. I'm down at Nottingham Forest at the moment, so I've been down there for just coming up for 2 years. Really enjoying it. Obviously, the club's doing fantastically well at first team level. Development in the academy space is going really, really well too. Even within the women and girls programme, striving. So the club as a whole is moving forward fantastically well. Proud to be a part of it. But yeah, coaching across the board going well. Finishing my UEFA Pro licence off as well at the moment with the Scottish FA. So that'll be nice to have that certificate of achievement when it happens. But yeah, progressing well for sure.
And do you feel it with the first team, obviously doing so successfully at the moment, trip to Wembley as well? Do you feel that from the academy perspective? Do you feel that kind of good vibe that's filtered down from first team down to?
For sure, it comes across the club. And even the women's team won the cup last Sunday. So the success that's happening across the whole club entirely has a knock-on effect in other areas. The team have also launched a netball team recently, which is the first game in the city. So that multi-club sport approach is obviously massive, but also using different disciplines as well to grow, I suppose, the brand of Nottingham Forest, but the community element as well. Yeah, it's certainly having an impact across every aspect of the club, including the academy. So it's a really, really nice place to be at the moment, and lots of positive things happening.
And do you live in Nottingham?
Yeah, so I'm based down there, but also I'm based back in Blackburn and Preston. So I've got that bit of a movement within my role that, depending on what's going on from a week to week level, sometimes it is on the grass with the players, sometimes it's away from it, supporting a lot of the loan players within my role, which is one of my priorities at this moment in time in terms of helping those players that are out on loan, younger players, but also senior players too. So yeah, I'm based at the training ground, but there's a lot of fluidity and movement depending on the calendar and the week.
Do you enjoy that in terms of that versatility and being up and down the country and supporting the loan process?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the brilliant part of that whole project is you get the opportunity to go and see the development of the young players who are going out on loan maybe the first time or second time, supporting them with their overall development. But in addition to that too, you're also seeing the senior players that for maybe some reason aren't in the first team at Nottingham Forest at the moment, but also seeing how they are thriving and achieving what they're achieving. But having the opportunity to go and watch so many different types of games, so many different levels, work alongside so many different head coaches that have different principles or values or their methodology slightly different, and seeing that in a working practice on a day-to-day is really, really good. So to have that exposure is fantastic, as I said, across all levels of the game, whether it be within the National League, whether it be going up to Scotland, the Scottish Premier League, whether it be going over, which I'm going in a few weeks to go see Rio Ave, one of our partner clubs over in Portugal. There's such a wide range of clubs and dynamics that exist within each one. So yeah, love that aspect of the role for sure.
What are your thoughts on the loan system as a whole? There's some people that are critical of it. Some people think that it's useful to get minutes. What are your thoughts on the whole process of developing players through a loan system and supporting them in their journey?
I think it's really important. I think the loan system's become more prevalent as well within probably the last 10 years. I think historically everybody always knows about Chelsea because Chelsea had so many players and they had so many players out on loan. But I think there's two strands of it. There's the development of the players to become a first team player, which is fantastic, but we also know, depending on the level of the club, there's also a lot of players that will develop and not maybe achieve that first team level. So if you take a Nottingham Forest at the moment, to break into Nottingham Forest first team is so difficult because the level is so high. So there might be a lot of those players that don't go on to achieve that feat. But what we like to think we are able to do is help them on their journey. So if they do achieve that, wonderful. And if they don't, they're in a position to go and have a fantastic career within the level that they can go and achieve, whether that be championship, whether it be, again, going playing in overseas European leagues, whatever the benchmark is for those players that are developing, there's an absolute space for the loan process enhancing those qualities. So I'm a big fan of it. I think over the course of that probably 10-year period that I'm speaking of, process have got a better understanding of what loan looks like and what good practice looks like when players are out on loan, rather than just saying August the 1st you're out on loan, see you next year, which probably back in the day did happen, and understandably so, because of a lack of resource. But because resource have been more spread and put to that whole area, then you're getting a lot more productivity, players are getting a lot more support, and there's a lot more success stories and case studies coming out of that, which is really, really good.
What does good practice look like in terms of a loan system? Obviously, the reason I ask that is technically and tactically, you might go, okay, a player might fit into a system and play and get minutes in terms of a difference between under 23s, under 18s. However, socially and psychologically, coming away from the comfort zone, I'm just interested on where that fits in terms of your thinking towards what best practice looks like.
So best practice for me is making sure that there's a clear plan for that player that's going to go out on loan. Again, all clubs do different approaches and there's different ways of working, which has been fascinating to see, and having colleagues at different clubs and how they operate. I think having that clarity of what are you looking to achieve for the player when they're out on loan. For example, a player may go out on loan, the first ever loan, and you may keep it quite local because you know that they've got a real strong family connection to the local area. They struggle being away from home, they get a bit homesick, and it's a big experience for them to go to a professional club further down the levels than what they would maybe understand, because the club that they're at, for example, a Premier League club, to go to a League 2 club, it's a big dynamic and culture change for them, but a healthy one. So it may be a case of keeping them more local in order to build that resilience, that mental toughness up, getting them to a point of understanding what senior football looks like for the next loan to then maybe be a little bit further away from home, because that is the reality of football. You're never going to be able to pick and choose your club 5 minutes down the road. So having that strategy and approach to understanding what you're looking to achieve, I think, is the biggest thing of good practice. Making sure key stakeholders, including within that communication process, so the player, obviously at the heart of it, agents, families, wider network support for the individual as well, but also for expectation internally and expectation externally within the partnership club that you're going to go and work with. And I think if you get real strong communication, clarity of what you're all trying to achieve as a common goal, like any team or dynamic, then that is what best practice looks like. There's obviously loads of ingredients and day-to-day actions that underpin all of that, but I think having that clarity of what you're looking to achieve together, everybody agreeing on that, and then the communication sitting behind it is a fundamental part of what a successful loan looks like, because there's always going to be bumps in the road. There's always going to be times where players are suspended or injured or they can't get into the team for any reason, but as long as the goal's been set out, you're in communication, then everybody knows how to basically combat those challenges as and when they arise.
What would a working week look like for you then?
Yeah, it's different. It can be so varied. So it can be from going and watching, obviously, players at the clubs, whether that be a training session, whether that be within a games programme. So we will always, as a club, and again, this is the same for every club that's got a loans department or team, go and watch the fixtures, and whether that be the loans manager, player pathway manager, player pathway assistant, directors of football. Naturally, we go out and watch so many of the games. So that's a big part of a weekly schedule. Tuesday, Wednesdays, Saturdays, Sundays predominantly, but we know now games can fall any time of the week. So that's one part of it, going and watching their training, making sure that we're at a training ground and got real strong rapport internally about how we're tracking and supporting the players within our own MDT is a big part of it. So it is so multifaceted that a lot of the time you're on the road driving from A to B, there is times of down periods where you get the opportunity to be at the training ground, but again, plotting and planning when the games are going to be, who's going to watch them, who's supporting the players where they may have been injured and they're coming back in-house for a period of time, or are they staying where they're at to get that support. It can be so almost random, but almost with a golden thread and a real clear approach to what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it. So yeah, between stadiums, training grounds and office time, it's usually spread between those three.
What does success look like for you in your role then? So the reason I ask that is that players might be seen as commodities, bring value to the football club. You mentioned Chelsea and that system of how you can create business adventure through academy football and loaning players and getting experience and seeing them as kind of valuable assets. However, there's that humanistic side, which I'm sure you've developed in terms of gaining experience within the role and getting to know the players.
Yeah.
What does success look like for you?
So I think everything needs to be player first. Of course, anybody working within a football club, whether you're a player, whether you're a coach, whether you're the loans manager, everybody is an asset to that football club, and it's the same for any business. You are supporting that business trying to achieve their own strategic goals. So that is important. We approach every player with the bespoke programme and bespoke support to their needs, and that again sits within our wider process that we help. What does success look like? Success looks like taking a player on their journey from A to B. Now, whatever that A to B looks like is determined on the individual. And sometimes that B goes to C, C goes to D, and it goes on and on until they achieve, hopefully, their full potential. So what does success look like? Helping a player on their journey go on to achieve their full potential. If we take a player and they go on loan for a season, at that point of being on loan for a season, it's a point of selling that player to a club, and then they go on to play for that club for 500 games, and that surpassed maybe what we've seen as their potential. That's success. If it's a player who comes on loan and goes on loan for a season, comes back and then goes all the way into the first team, for example, a Ryan Yates or a Brennan Johnson, and they go all the way through and have successful careers playing the Premier League for many, many years, equally success. So I don't think it's defined by you need to develop a Premier League player, because that isn't realistic. What I think it's important is helping young players particularly go on to achieve and fulfil what their potential is. And if we can help either play a massive part in it or potentially be a stepping stone into achieving that, then we've done our job for me.
How did football become part of your life then? So explain that in terms of you being the son of a football manager. Talk to me about the process and what was life like for you early in your journey?
Yeah, it's a bit of an odd one, because I suppose football was from day one, without me maybe realising or knowing. So growing up in Glasgow, until I was around 11, 12, my early memories of football was all my dad as far as playing. So playing for Falkirk up in Scotland, player manager for St Johnstone up in Scotland. They're my kind of memories that really stand out. There was other clubs that he was at when I was younger, but I don't really remember a lot of it. And at the point of 11, 12, he made the move south to Burnley. So he left St Johnstone and went to Burnley. At that point, we obviously moved country from Scotland to England. So that was quite an eye-opening experience, moving school, having to build new friendship groups, building friendship groups with a school that were half Burnley, half Blackburn fans. And even that dynamic of being pretty young was a bit odd, peculiar, because when he was in St Johnstone and Falkirk, even though he was working in football, I'm not saying nobody knew of him, because they did, but it wasn't that important. Yeah. Unless you're doing something for Celtic or you're doing something for Rangers, in the main, up the road, then everything else can at points be a little bit passive. So as far as his profile in Scotland, people knew him, but it wasn't an issue at school or nobody really knew about it. You flip that down here, you're then in the Championship, it's a much bigger league, there's more awareness of it. I wouldn't say the fans are more passionate, but you support your local club. Again, up in Scotland, a lot of towns and areas will support Celtic or Rangers, maybe outside of your Aberdeens, your Hearts, your Hibs. Well, down here, Burnley fans and people living in Burnley support Burnley, and the same with Blackburn, and the same way with a lot of the villages and towns and small cities, which is awesome. So that dynamic was completely different. Experiencing that and being involved in it day to day in the playground, speaking to school teachers who again had their local team that they supported, and yeah, it was amazing, because what I had from an early age is insight and exposure to high performance environments, because at half term I'd go into Burnley, or at half time I'd go into Bolton when he eventually moved to Bolton, and I'd be around the players and I'd be around training. I'd see how the chef cooked the food, I would see what the sports science team done, and again, that's 15 years or so ago, so the sport's moved on so much since then, but having that exposure and just ability to speak to professional athletes and professional coaches and support staff probably enhanced and developed a lot of my soft skills, and able to interact and build relationships and rapport with each other, which is obviously a massive part of the team dynamic. So yeah, my childhood and upbringing was something that I was really fortunate to have, really fortunate, and something I look back on very, very fondly, and I think a lot of it's helped shape probably where I am today in different ways.
Who do you support? I'm
actually a Celtic fan, so Celtic's my team. I don't know if I should be saying this on camera, but it doesn't make or break my weekend. So I used to go and watch Celtic when I was a young kid. I went to European games. I remember going over to Barcelona and Juventus in the Champions League. But I think because you become so immersed in your own role and what you're doing, that all just falls by the wayside. So if Celtic are playing, I'll watch them. If they're playing against Rangers, I'd like to see obviously come on the positive side of that for sure. But yeah, my priorities, I suppose, try to do as well as you can within your own role and the own club that you're working for, which at this moment is Nottingham Forest. So it's all hands to the pump to bring that to life.
It's always interesting when I ask people about who they support, and even in a smaller sense, I work for, prior to my academic role, I worked at West Bromwich Albion, and obviously my team's Birmingham City, and it kind of goes out the window, don't it, in terms of the team you support, but some people can't comprehend that, people don't get it, do you know? But it's an interesting perspective how you mentioned that. Did you follow the teams that you had managed? Was that another aspect of that as well?
So I think that's probably, as much as I'm saying my role, the biggest thing is actually supporting my dad's team, and this is a real strange experience, because I can go from being a super fan almost of a team, but it's really a super fan of my dad when I was growing up, to the next day when he inevitably leaves a club, whether he moved on from Burnley to Bolton, or he gets sacked or dismissed from roles that he was at, and just all of a sudden overnight you've not really got an interest in that team anymore, because the only reason that he did have that interest was because my dad was a part of it. So wherever he went, I would never miss any of his matches. I'd go and follow them home and away. He's obviously working over in India now. I still don't miss any of his matches, so I watch all his games online.
How do you watch that?
So there's a stream that he sends across, and I watch all his
stream.
games. Stream, indeed. Exactly that. And then from there, we usually just review the game and chat about what's going on. If it's a good performance, it's a really positive chat that we have. If it's not a great performance, it's usually a lot shorter, and he just wants to go and clear his head for a few hours before he gives the buzz back. So yeah.
How was that for you, away from maybe football and coaching? So you mentioned moving to Blackburn and Bolton, that area, and moving school. Everyone knows you as, obviously, your name is Owen Coyle.
Yeah.
So how does that impact you in terms of performances on the pitch? So if things are going well, I suppose you're popular, but if things are not going too well, how did that impact you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big part of childhood and growing up, and some of it was tough being a teenager and probably being exposed to a lot of criticism of
like what?
My dad. So when he left Burnley to go to Bolton, that was a massive story at the time, because Burnley took in from the Championship to the Premier League, I thought, to the top division for the first time in 30 odd years. I think Burnley that season were favourites to get relegated. Out of nowhere, it was probably the first story of its kind of taking a club of that size into the Premier League, and he was a hero. And again, all the success and love that he had from the Burnley fans, who were amazing, was as big as anybody probably could ever experienced. And he went from that to then a few months later leaving to go to Bolton, which is a team that he played for, a team that at the time were making really, really good strides in terms of their own development in the training ground, beautiful stadium, and still have that beautiful stadium, and making good strides off the pitch as well, and historically been a really good team under Sam Allardyce and been in Europe 4 or 5 seasons before that. So from going from Burnley to Bolton, whilst it was a massive success in a way for my dad to make that move, it also came with a lot of criticism. And again, going back to being at school, my school was half Burnley, half Blackburn. So if you look at that, Blackburn fans don't like him anyway, because he took the rival club from the Championship to the Premier League. And equally, Burnley fans now don't like him because in their eyes he'd betrayed them and left them midway through the season. So being in that atmosphere on a day-to-day basis was interesting. You got criticised, you get people obviously having comments just as you do as a kid, probably not thinking a lot of it, but there's probably a lot to deal with. And then there's the whole social media lens as well, which at the time it probably wasn't as big as what it is now, but was still relatively impactful. So again, criticism on there, targeted on there, which at 13, 14, 15, looking back at it now, you got like whatever, it's water off duck's back, but probably at that age, because I'd never been exposed to it before, it was eye-opening to cope with that. And I always remember from an early age, which it's not something I regret, I learnt from and I grew, but I always wanted to have my say. I always wanted to bite back and have an opinion, to try and defend my dad because he's my dad, or defend decisions or defend results or whatever it may be. Reality, that's not the right thing to do, which again now 15 years later you realise that, and that was a young mistake being a teenager, because fans are passionate, fans care, and fans have got opinions, and rightly so, and they're not always going to see it through the lens of maybe what's happening on the ground and those that are connected and around it on a day-to-day level. So me having that approach wasn't going to change anything, but that was obviously something that I maybe wasn't fully aware of or mature enough to understand yet that in those teenage years, but certainly learnt my lesson since.
I suppose it might be a different landscape today. You mentioned the element of social media and the toxicity today in comparison to that. Do you feel that has benefited you, that process of, you mentioned the pros of being around the culture of football and the networking element and understanding what high performance looks like, and the hardship of, well, if this is what fans and media and everything else associated with the negative side probably of football. Do you feel that has benefited you in terms of the experiences that you have today that you can share with players and coaches on that?
For sure, I think twofold. One, sharing with young players that are coming through that is naturally a part of the game, particularly the higher up the levels you go, the more exposure you're going to get. And then also from a personal perspective and being able to deal with that myself now, I'm in the position that I'm in at the moment with Nottingham Forest, and absolutely love it. Fantastic club. But who knows what the future also brings for myself in terms of career opportunities. So if I was fortunate enough to go down the route of being a head coach and being at a level, that comes part and parcel of the role of being a head coach or a manager. So being exposed to that at a young age, of course, you can't say it doesn't bother you, because it's never been nice being criticised, and maybe being criticised unfairly from your lens, if that's how you feel about it. But I definitely feel like I've got the strategy and the coping mechanisms to be able to deal with that quite comfortably, no matter what level and exposure you get to. Because I'm not saying the exposure I had when I was 13, 14, 15 was as big as David Beckham, for example, but he was in the Premier League. There's thousands of fans, there's a lot of people who are passionate about it, and everybody's got an opinion, everybody's got a say. So I've had that experience, I've dealt with it, I've grown from it, learnt a lot from it, which I think now, as you mature, it's not something that would be a shock to the system if I was to receive a role that's in the public domain or the public eye in 2 years' time or 5 years' time or 10 years' time. I'd be able to reflect back on that experience, how I coped with it, how I learnt from it, and be able to put it into practice. And it still exists today. Even the clubs he's at just now, he still gets targeted and criticised, and you go onto Twitter and people are tagging you and stuff because people want to try and get their message across to him through me, because he doesn't have social media. So it still exists, but again, it is water off a duck's back. Don't spend much time about it now.
Let's hope they don't criticise this podcast.
Yeah, for sure. No, I don't think so. I think you're doing a top job. You'll be all right.
Just on that then, so how do you develop your own unique identity then? So you mentioned your dad and everything associated with the roles he's had and the experiences that you've had, but you are your own coach and you want to make your own journey. So how do you separate that? Is there anything that you do that, from a mindset perspective, that you go, okay, well, actually, I want to achieve X, Y, and Z, and my journey's my journey? Or did you ever feel that as a coach? Yeah, for sure. I think coaching, even in personal life, everybody straight away, first questions, how's your dad doing? Is he still over in India, for example, at the moment? We'll be talking about this now. Epitomises that point. Yeah, for sure. And for me, it's just something I'm comfortable with. I mean, I'm really proud of my dad. So what he's achieved in the game and continues to achieve is something that, as a son, I'm really, really proud of. So to be associated to him, affiliated to him, it's a compliment. And there's a lot of podcasts that happen, and everybody's got a story to tell, and everybody wants a soundbite naturally. So there's still a lot of even existing podcasts in the last few weeks come out criticising him about his management style or the way he coaches. But the one thing that everybody says about him is he's an incredible person, and I genuinely believe that. So how do I separate me from him? I try and be as authentic as I can be, naturally, and through the upbringing of him and also my mum. They have shaped me in terms of who they are and learnt behaviours and everything that goes with that. So I'm aware of that, comfortable around it, because they're two amazing people that I'm really, really fortunate have given me the upbringing and support they have, and love being a young person to even where I'm at today. What did I do consciously to try and change it? Well, I probably 4 or 5 years ago made the decision I was going to take Junior out of my name, because then everybody does straight away, or son of, which, I mean, everybody's going to assume that I'm connected having the exact same name, but I don't need Junior. Like, he's Owen Coyle, I'm Owen Coyle, we're both same name, but both different people. So that was one thing I decided to do. But then away from that, it's just being yourself, creating your own path. The opportunity we had up at Queen's Park together, working hand in hand, was amazing. Being his assistant, we were a game away from winning the league and getting promoted to the Premier League, and Dundee pipped us on that final day of the season. So that was a real heartbreaking experience. But to be with my dad for that season, work in a professional football environment, take a team who had been in the division, that was their first season in the Championship, all the way through to potentially win the league, was a massive achievement and feat in itself. And at that point, when we left Queen's Park, we had the conversation. I said, listen, I'm going to go away and have a go at doing my own thing again. I would love to go and work with him again at some point in the future. I think we can complement each other really well. I think there's skills and attributes that I have that can help enhance his way of working and how successful his team would be, because there's a lot of things that he has that no matter how much I practice or work is him, and I wouldn't be able to get to that level that he does. So again, learning from him and being around that is, I think, a really, really strong ingredients to bring together to achieve success in the future. But I've made that conscious decision to go and have a bit of time doing my own thing again, which I suppose is a choice that I've absolutely loved, because it's led me to the opportunities that I've currently got, which again I'm really fortunate and really enjoying. Gary Bowyer, was that? Gary was there. You know, it's the second time he's been mentioned. Has he? I spoke to Rudiger Stead. He mentioned Gary Bowyer signed him at Blackburn. Yeah. And now he's been mentioned again in terms of you.
I tell you what, Gary is a fantastic man. Gary, I actually worked I'm not saying alongside, because I was working in the community trust at the time at Blackpool, and he was a Blackpool manager.
Yeah.
But the way he worked within the community settings, the way he worked above and beyond the role of a manager, I always remember really, really fondly. And then, again, 7-8 years later, we're facing each other in the dugout as assistant final day of the season, and they won that game. It was a thriller. It was weird the way it worked out, because it was the final day of the season, but it was just a regular league game. And the way it worked was whoever won that game won the league. So it went down to the wire, and they beat us. I think it finished 5-3 or it was 4-2 on the day. But it was a topsy-turvy game, a rollercoaster. I think it was 3 each at half-time possibly. But it's a bit of a blur, if I'm being honest, it all happened. But I also remember going back to Gary at the end of that game, the Dundee fans, because they won the league, rightly stormed the pitch to celebrate. But again, my dad, going back to his playing career, played for Dundee United. So they had a dislike towards him anyway, and fans are obviously, it's late at night, they've won the league, people are a bit excitable, should you say, and fans again directly came and targeted him at the end of the game and stormed the pitch, and Gary and myself walked with my dad off the pitch, and which again was a real show of solidarity, and it just shows you the type of guy he is. Instead of going relishing his own success and win the league, which was a fantastic achievement for them, he took the time for a minute to make sure that everybody from the staff at Queen's Park and the players got off the pitch, but particularly his colleague being my dad. They walked off the pitch together. We obviously went in the changing rooms, a bit of a sorrowful moment, but that was a small act. But yeah, he's a really, really good person. He's doing fantastically well at Bolton, and hopefully this season they manage to stay in the league as well. I'm tracking and following the games. I actually seen him a few weeks ago at Wigan, and just said hellos.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, he's been on this podcast. It's just interesting how he's consistently been mentioned.
He's a great guy.
In terms of that. You mentioned the element of fans, and I know we've kind of touched upon it, but does that take a bit of a toll after a bit? Do you ever feel drained from the bombardment of, you mentioned Dundee United fans and people potentially abusing you and your family? Does that ever impact you as a whole? Have you got brothers and sisters?
Yeah,
does that ever impact them, or does it impact the family as a whole?
I think my sisters and my mum, they I'm not saying they love football, but again, they've been so closely connected to the game the whole way through, but they probably disconnect a little bit in that sense. So they don't watch the games as often unless it's a big moment. They obviously came to a few of the games when we were working together up in Queen's Park. So they've got an interest. They want to know the results. They want to know how it's getting on, because it naturally impacts career opportunities, and it cracks family dynamics and everything that go with that. So they're disconnected. So it doesn't really target them, or they don't get much exposure to that. My dad himself, he's obviously not on social media, so he doesn't really have a lot of contact directly with fans unless it's at fans forums or if it's within the stadium environment. The person that probably does have more exposure is myself, and that's obviously a choice that I make to be on social media. I don't think it becomes tiring anymore, because it genuinely is almost like, I'm blind to it, but if something comes through, you read it and it's like, don't spend any time thinking about it or even considering what it is. If anything, it just brings me awareness to his current position of what the fans' perception of him is. Now, if it's one fan, no problem. If it's thousands of people that are coming through, you're probably getting a bit of a feeling of actually how the wider fan base is feeling. And again, that doesn't change my approach to informing them or making them aware. It just brings me awareness to it, and just accept it for what it is, essentially. I think the only times that it does become more challenging if it becomes really personal, which where he's currently at now in India, even though fans at points have flared up as they do naturally, there is nothing personal that's ever within that. When he was back here in England, because of the locality and people know maybe more about the family and who you are, it can get personal at points, but again, you take it for what it is, you let it go, and you recognise that if somebody wants to go and really be malicious or be nasty within their approach, it's probably not somebody you want to be spending a lot of time around or even considering an opinion, with all due respect. So you just let that go for what it is and move on.
It's crazy how it enforces people's lives. I always think it's just 11 versus 11 men, you know. They don't care about you, but you really care about them. But, you know, that's a whole different story based on the cultural aspect. Scotland, you mentioned your pro licence.
Yeah.
Why do you think there's so many good coaches that come from Scotland? What do you think that's down to? And you mentioned your dad when he was at Bolton and Blackburn, but during that time there was Alex McLeish, Sir Alex Ferguson, you know, other great Scottish coaches. And if you look at the history of the Premier League as well, there's been some good coaches up and down the footballing pyramid. What do you think that is?
I think particularly if you look at that era of football, and particularly the Premier League, which was and still is the top division as far as awareness, quality and everything that follows, I think Scottish coaches have really, really good soft skills. So they know how to build relationships with people and they know how to manage people. Now, I'm not saying that isn't the case for any other country or group of people, but I think it comes across from me, a lot of the people I've come across in my time of coaching, that there's an authenticity behind it. And naturally that will then be down to how you've been brought up. It'll be down to the local community you've been brought up in, the people that naturally you're directly in contact with on a day-to-day level have probably helped shape your Alex McLeish, your Sir Alex Ferguson, my dad, David Moyes, these guys that have
Steve Clarke would have been there as well.
Steve Clarke, there's so many that have been top Premier League coaches and worked at that level. So I think that's one massive facet of it. If you ask me why do I think there's less Scottish coaches in the game now than what there was, I think because the game's also evolved and developed, particularly from a tactical sense, and I think the game has moved so quickly that maybe Scottish coaches as a whole are trying to still catch up to that as far as developing younger players to have that exposure. You look at the Scottish Premier League and the amount of young players that are playing in the league at the moment, which I know the Scottish FA are fully aware of, and they're driving a lot of changes to improve that. But there's not a lot of young players playing in the Premier League. And also, if you look at the style of football, I think Scotland had one of the highest, as far as data goes, direct play from goal kicks in comparison to any other league in Europe. Now, it's not to say that's right or wrong, because the game can be played in a million different ways, but I think we've also seen the game change to more of a possession dominant style, which Scottish football, that's not Scottish football. And I'm saying hopefully never will be, but I don't think Scottish football needs to follow the trend of that. I think Scottish football needs to decide what is it makes it exciting, what is it that makes it different, and that would also then allow potentially Scottish coaches in the future to come back into these top divisions and bring a little bit of that to it, but also understanding how the game at the top level, being the Premier League's evolved, and making sure that you've got principles and approaches that align to that. So, I think it comes back to soft skills and being able to build relationships with people and building that trust and rapport.
It's improved though. If you look at the performances of Celtic in the Champions League and Rangers in the Europa League, and even the European Championships last year, I know it was a bit of a difficult journey, but you see that progression? Yeah,
for sure. There's loads of progress as far as small steps, and again, it's not built overnight, but the Scottish Premier League, like any league in the world, if it's not in the Premier League in England, there's so many different resources available in comparison. So if you look at Celtic or Rangers, they have incredible amounts of resources compared to the other teams. Like, even if you take Celtic, they've got incredible amount of resources compared to Rangers at this moment in time. Rangers then more so than Aberdeen and Hearts and Hibs, then more so than, and you go on and on and on. But you still compare that to your top European teams. Celtic and Rangers are dwarfed by even a Fenerbahce the Rangers came up against only a few weeks ago, but Rangers had a fantastic result and performance. There's definitely steps and strides forward as far as the game goes from a performance lens. I think development of young players to help those teams progress, but also to help the national team better, I think is where everybody wants to go with it. But it's making sure that that's brought to life, and it's not an easy thing just to click your fingers and say we're going to do X, Y and Z and then it just happens overnight. It's building that full buy-in from everybody within the game to try and achieve that, and then taking the appropriate steps to do so. But yeah, for sure there has been small steps, and the league's always been competitive. You take Celtic back in the UEFA League as it was, UEFA Cup back in the day at Seville. They went over and played Porto when Henrik Larsson played and Mourinho was at Porto. So they've always competed every now and again, but they probably want to be more consistent in being in and around the top teams across Europe, however that's achieved.
How's the pro licence for you? Obviously you mentioned the development of Scotland, but obviously doing your pro licence with the Scottish FA, am I right in saying that?
That's great. Yeah.
So how was that for you in terms of seeing that evolve and being involved with, you mentioned strategies and coaching styles and soft skills, etc. How do you see that in terms of the development of Scottish coaches in that sense? Yeah,
really good. And one of the things that the Scottish FA Pro Licence Coach course offers, is we have another group of foreign students that are on that course as well. So we've got coaches from different countries. One, Gil Sosa, that's working at Famalicão in Portugal at the moment, and he's assistant coach there. So to learn from how he works in Portugal and what's the differences between Portuguese culture and then Portuguese football and everything that sits within that, and how does that then relate to the Scottish game? And that's done indirectly just through networking and chatting. You've got a gentleman called Jens who's been the assistant coach at Benfica and worked at that top level as well, but again within Portugal, but he's also German, so you understand a little bit the German aspect on how they build their courses up from a pro licence or UEFA A perspective, because that was the courses that he'd done, and then how that relates to what we do here. So there's definitely that networking from foreign students and overseas students, which is a real benefit, but then also seeing what we're learning in order to help us, if we do become future head coaches or managers, that is relevant to modern trends of the game. So we've just been over to UEFA over in Switzerland, and we had a 4-day event, and again it brought coaches from all over Europe together. So there's coaches from Lithuania, there was coaches from Turkey, Croatia, ourselves, and again having those group of people come together, share experiences, knowledge, but also have UEFA driving, here are the modern trends, here are the strategies that are ongoing, here are the future topics to be aware of that will relate to you within your role. It's really, really important, because you also need to future-proof yourself where you can for what's about to come. And nobody's got a crystal ball, but being able to map out that journey of what could the future look like and how am I going to be able to make a mark in that positively, I think is really, really good practice. So yeah, there's been loads learnt from the UEFA Pro licence with the Scottish FA. I've absolutely loved it. We've got 2 months or so, I believe, left before hopefully completing, and at that point I think I'm the youngest on the course, which is something that again I'm proud of, because being younger on the course, you're getting to lean on and learn from those that are also a lot older, get a lot more experience under the belt, but hopefully someone who achieves UEFA Pro licence, then myself can then go on to have a successful career, and knowing, looking back, that all those people again have leaned on and have helped me get to eventually where I want to go.
What do you mean by future-proofing? So can you explain that? Is that a new form of coach? You obviously see the trends of set-piece coaches and how that's publicised in the media. Can you give a little bit more depth in that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, future-proofing can be anything you want it to be, but essentially looking at the data and look at the trends of what could come in the future. So again, without going through what can come and not making stuff up, because nobody knows what's about to come, but you'd be able to see that actually the game has evolved from probably more of a direct game on the pitch to then being more possession based. Is that going to last forever, being more possession based? I'd maybe put questions behind that. My personal feel is the game will become more direct again, maybe not as it once was, but maybe in different ways, maybe through more transitional approaches. And again, if you look at Nottingham Forest at the moment, they're the best team in the Premier League have been transitional and where they are and succeeding and pushing through that ceiling. So there's definitely future-proofing trends on the pitch, but also looking at how the game's evolving through the broadcasting, driving more money coming into the game. How long will that money remain in the game? What's maybe going to change in the future around that, as far as contracts, as far as the transfer market, as far as how that impacts loans? So almost everything impacts everything. It's a domino effect, but it's looking at that within your sphere, within your own role you're doing, within where you want to go and going. What do I need to do to basically be ahead of the curve? And I think if you're looking to constantly be ahead of the curve, whilst also still being present and doing what you need to do in that moment and being good at it, then you give yourself the best possible chance of being successful within whatever remit that you're going to go and work in.
What does the future hold for Owen Coyle? Like, what are you aiming towards? Because the reason I say this is maybe in 10 years' time we could clip this up and it could get us a few more views.
So what am I aiming towards? I would love to be a head coach one day. That was always the ambition when I set out to be 16, when I started my coaching journey. I wanted to be a head coach, or a manager at the time, but a manager's now evolved to head coach. I am open-minded. I do want to work at the highest level possible for as long as possible. Now, if that is an opportunity to work as a loans manager in the Premier League for the next 15 years, that would be something I'd love to do, and I'd be really, really proud to achieve that. If that's to become a future sporting director at a club, a Premier League club, or another club within Europe for a long period of time, I'd love to do that. If somebody said you can do whatever you want, there's your crystal ball, go and make it happen, I'd go and be a head coach at the highest level for as long as I could. That would be my dream, but I am open-minded, and I think where I'm at in my career is I'm just about to finish my Master's in Sporting Directorship, just about to finish my pro licence, so there's 2 roads that I could potentially go down around the head coach managerial opportunity or sporting director or director of football type opportunity. And I think that's what I enjoy where I'm being at the moment, being open-minded to what opportunities arise to take me down potentially future paths, but knowing that actually I need to continue to work hard to take any one of those roads. So hopefully that answers it, and maybe not as clear as mud, but yeah, I just want to work at the highest level as long as I can.
It's the $1 million question, and
Yeah,
I don't mean to
sure.
put pressure
No,
on
not
you
at all,
in that
not at
sense,
all.
you know,
Don't be daft.
I think it's interesting, your drive and passion towards that, and you mentioned your dad and the influences that you've had. I suppose stars align in that sense of giving you that. You can see it. Do you know what I mean? You can see it because you've been around it.
Yeah, for
Would you
sure.
agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think there's a challenge point around that of there's pros and cons, isn't there? Being, again, going back to being affiliated, associated with my dad's name and being my dad's son. There's the positive that he's got a really strong network. He's really, really well known. So naturally then people will become more aware of you quite quickly and more familiar, which is great. The con of that is people that maybe don't think as highly of him for any reason, or have got a perception of him around his abilities or capabilities, then sometimes they attach that directly to you, which can again also be a positive because somebody loves him and thinks it's amazing. That can also work in your favour. So again, there's that whole balancing act of, whilst all that exists, trying to get in front of people so they can just let me be me and decide whether they think I'm somebody with ability or capability to help them within their organisation. And that's probably my biggest message to anybody that I'm speaking to or I've previously applied for roles with, and even the opportunity I had in Nottingham Forest, it was very much let me come down and meet with you guys as Owen, and you make your own mind up of whether you think I can add value to you or not, as a wider team and contribute in that way. So yeah, it definitely helps knowing what the manager role looks like, what the day-to-day life of a Premier League manager was. Again, it's changed probably a little bit, but because I'm also involved in that Premier League environment at the moment, I still get a touch point on how it looks, and there is a lot of similarity. There's some difference, but yeah, it's absolutely benefited me having that exposure.
Yeah, it's interesting when I speak to coaches, I always ask the question around, do you need a playing experience? But I think in your sense, you've got that social and cultural capital where you understand the game differently. And I always think people with a playing experience get to understand, you know, the days-to-days of working in football, get to understand how to deal with people, the management and leadership, how to deal with defeat, how to deal with, you know, success. I suppose you've got that based on those experiences that you've had, and it doesn't really, in a sense, it kind of relates to that playing experience in a different way, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, no, 100%, I agree with that, and I think that experience I've had in almost doing an apprenticeship as a coach, even though it wasn't my apprenticeship to do, it was through my experience with my dad, has absolutely served me well. There definitely is still a challenge point around not being a professional player, and again, that's something that many people have spoken about that have coaches now. But I think, again, if you look at how the game's progressed, there's a lot of coaches that are now coaching that haven't been professional players. But I do think, to caveat that, my experience that I've had probably does give a little bit more exposure and awareness to the roles, particularly in decision makers' eyes. So if it's an owner, a director of football, I'd like to think they can recognise that experience helps, not saying fast track me, but it does progress me maybe in comparison to someone that hasn't had that experience, whether it be a player, if they've not been a player or they've not been a coach at that level, that whole experience will be completely new to them, and that doesn't mean that they don't deserve that opportunity. That's just where different people are on their journey. So yeah, I'd agree that experience I've had's definitely served me well, and hopefully will serve me well in the future.
What's your biggest learning lesson?
Biggest learning lesson. I've learned too much, I think, and still learning on a day-to-day.
Is there anything that stuck out and think, okay, I've learned a lot from that experience, and maybe I need to focus on certain characteristics or traits? Or
yeah, I think one of the things that I'm saying working on at the moment, something that I've been speaking to my support network with, and I've got people within that I really trust, and like anybody you go and meet with and you get their guidance and advice around, is actually just recognising that I don't need to be fantastic at everything, and you can have weaknesses, but I'm almost, and have been probably since a young age on this journey, that if I don't know something, it's a deficit. So not knowing is a deficit, and I want to try and catch that up as quickly as I can. So I'm saying a really funny story, but a really light story is, at the moment I've started playing paddle. But I only started playing paddle about 9 months ago, and I could barely even hold the racket and hit the ball. I was terrible, because again, in Scotland nobody plays cricket. you very rarely play tennis. I mean, obviously Andy Murray's done fantastically well, but it's very much football, football, football. So starting to play paddle in the local area I'm in, which is quite a nice area, and they've all played cricket and they're all wonderful at tennis and they've all grown up doing that sort of thing. I was terrible. So it was very much, I'm in deficit now. I need to catch everybody up. So I've played probably too much over the last 9 months, but I've got to a point and I'm now competitive. I'm not amazing, but I'm all right. I can play in the games with some of the good players and I'm okay. And I feel more comfortable in that space. But going back to my professional career, it's recognising like whether it's paddle or otherwise, but you don't need to be amazing at everything, and that's something I've always wanted to be. And somebody actually that I know really well compared me to a Swiss Army knife not so long ago, which was a real compliment, that you're somebody that can do everything, but at some point, and this is the point, I need to refine myself to say these are my super strengths, these are the areas that I'm not amazing at but I want to try and work at, and actually these are the areas I'm not really good at, and somebody else can be there to own that and support with that, and I don't need to put my time into the things that I just probably won't ever be good at. Now, I do believe if you apply yourself at anything, you can become good at it or competent at it, but it's recognising what's most important to me. And I think that'll also help shape where I eventually go and what journey the next phase of my career goes on based on that.
I suppose it's a competitive and driven mindset, though.
Yeah.
So you can take positives based on that. And it's interesting how you mentioned the element of delegation long term, but I suppose it shows the characteristics that you have, that you want to give 100%, and there's no grey areas. It's I'm going to work hard at this and become better at it. And it's, I don't know if obsession's the right word, but they can be transferable skills into coaching and management. Yeah,
it's that want to become better, and it's definitely healthy, but there's that tipping point of it as well, that it doesn't consume you, and that's, again, reflecting on personal life and life lessons. 24/7, 7 days a week, I'm at it in some capacity. When I go and play five-a-side, which I still do, or go and play paddle, that's my switch off time, but that's only for an hour a day, and then straight away it's back to work, it's back to taking action on what I need to do, but it's also going, right, how can I get better, how can I learn, what more can I be doing, which again is probably epitomising the fact that I'm doing a pro licence and doing a master's at the same time, which is crazy, but it's that hunger to want to get better and learn. And I would say my biggest strength is I try and surround myself with people that are better than me, and that I just constantly lean on and just constantly absorb their knowledge and continue to make progress with, and not using people in that way, because a lot of amazing relationships that I've got there with people that I trust so much that have helped me again get to where I'm at just now, and grateful for that. But yeah,
do you see that in the game? Do you see people use people based on that aspect of trying to get up the table?
Yeah, for sure, without a doubt, and I think everybody does it, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, as long as you recognise if you're doing it, why you're doing it, and actually what the relationship still means to you, because it needs to be done authentically. You can't just use somebody for your own benefit and then dispose of them. Everybody that I would like to think that I use close to me is one benefit me and helping me get better, but I care about them too, and I want to see them do well, and if I can help them a little bit in their space, then we do that, because that's just like any relationship, isn't it? You want to see good people around you continue to thrive and succeed. But yeah, of course the games are really it's a really direct game at points as far as off the pitch, and people do of course want to move up the ladder to your roles, which are there to give you a bigger profile, or they give a bigger salary, because actually the bottom end of the game, but middle to bottom, whether you're a player or you're a coach, the outcomes for you doing what you're doing, despite probably giving the same level of sacrifice, maybe isn't there. So if you are a League 2 coach, you're sacrificing the same amount of time as what a Premier League coach would do, but you're not getting the same rewards. And again, that's like any industry or business, right? But I think football is really, and sport, a high performance sport, it's really crucial that you do invest all your time and energy into it. And I think that's where people do become disillusioned, where they're in League 1, League 2, National League, wherever in Europe, and they're not getting the rewards that the effort and energy they're putting into the role deserves. But we all know there's only so few of those roles that pay and give you your incentives that everybody's actually trying to work towards. So of course people want to try and move up that ladder to get to that point, but you need to do it in a way that is authentic and true to yourself, for sure.
Yeah, I always think you get caught out eventually if you're not ethically open towards those ideas. It's an interesting perspective. What excites you the most about the game today?
I think what's next to come. So again, if you map out the journey of football and where football's even started at the very start point to where it's at to the present day, and then I look at my own experience from, I was 1996, so when I was born in 1996 to where it is.
So how old are you, Owen?
28. So
28.
Yeah, the grey hair doesn't look like that. The grey hair puts
So
a few
it's
years
just
on
for
it.
this, so you mentioned the element of being the youngest on the pro licence, so it gives listeners
Yeah.
and viewers an insight based on that.
For sure, and I mean, you look at the coaching journey. So I'd done my level 1 when I was 16. So that's, well, it's 12 years later that I'm now in the process of hopefully finishing and complete my pro licence. So it's a long journey to go on to get that highest level award, if you will. But yeah, what excites me the most is what's still to come in football. So how the game's going to change, how it's going to revolutionise. You see little things that are happening at the moment, like the Baller League, or you look at seeing what's happening over in Spain with Piqué in the league that he set up. But how's that going to impact the mainstream game? You look at younger fans that are coming through now. Very few of them will watch 90 minutes of football. So it's all about reels and shots and clips as opposed to watching the full game. At some point, football's probably going to need to change in some way. I'm not saying what that looks like because I don't have the answer to that. Otherwise, I'd probably be in an amazing role somewhere. But the game must evolve in order to keep the demand of the audience that's going to continue to service it. Yeah. So it will be interesting what comes, and that excites me to see what impact that I can have in that and how hopefully I can pivot and be ready to move as it continues to evolve.
You can kind of see that happening already. You mentioned the element of time.
Yeah.
Have you seen the new rule coming into play next year with the time wasting with the keeper that goes to a corner?
So that's been trialled at the moment within, I think it's Premier League 2 and some of the other competitions to bring that out. But yeah, you're right. And again, fans, even myself and probably yourself, when you're watching a game and a goalkeeper's hanging onto the ball, or in 20 minutes a goalkeeper hits the deck, so everybody can go into the coach to get their planned briefing. And like from a performance point of view, if I'm the coach, of course that's exactly what you want to do, because you need to try and get the win of the game and get the performance and get the result. But as a spectator, that doesn't excite you. Then I even look back to Postecoglou when he was at Celtic. Celtic fans loved that journey for a couple of years because everything was about being exciting, being direct, being vibrant. And I know it's maybe not worked out in the moment how he'd planned at Spurs, but the fact that he embodied that and he resonated with the supporters that that's what they wanted, and he brought that to life. That was special. So, I definitely think there's those trends already coming in, and whether the game becomes shorter, whether it goes to quarters, there's all sorts of things that I'd probably say on here that people would all of a sudden fall off their seat by, but that's not our game. But the reality is football at some point will need to to continue to evolve.
It's interesting you mentioned Postecoglou. The ball boys were quite quick.
Yeah, they were throwing them in, and Celtic's for probably the first 9 months of that was very much take your throw in immediately. So catch the opposition out when they're not set. Obviously, the opposition became aware of it, and away ball boys would slow the game down, and there'd only be one ball, no multi-ball, all that sort of stuff. So you're always having to find ways to innovate, and again, find those kind of marginal gains, if you will. But at some point, people also come abreast of those marginal gains and either implement them themselves or they find a way to stop you.
What do the next couple of years look like for you? And if you to maybe reflect on your journey so far, how do you think that will kind of play out for you in terms of what you mentioned the words, putting your mind on things and setting out to achieve certain goals and wanting to obtain those objectives that you have personally. What does that look like for you?
So I think at this moment in time, it's a case of, on a personal but professional level, completing my pro licence and completing my masters to the best of my abilities, and hopefully coming out with a positive outcome of both of them, achieving both courses. And then within my professional role at Nottingham Forest is just continue to learn and evolve. I'm grateful when I've got some fantastic mentors and people that I'm working with at the club. So you've got Craig Mulholland, you've got Ross Wilson, work directly closely with at the moment, Chris Brass, who's fantastic as well, alongside obviously all the coaching staff that are there. So being able to work and learn from those guys is wonderful, and just continue to channel my energy and efforts into that role to hopefully show that, one, I'm open-minded to learn and keep improving, but two, continue to enhance and improve that space for Nottingham Forest. I think if I do that, what comes next probably takes care of itself, because people recognise it and they see it, and football's a small world, people talk quite quickly, don't they? So that's really where I'm at the moment. Put all time, energy, effort into doing that, try and apply my learnings from both those courses and decompress a little bit as well, because that's been a lot of learning within a 2-year period and a 2-year cycle. So probably take a little bit more personal time back to reflect and how I can implement some of that into my day-to-day, and continue to drive that space forward.
Owen, good luck. Thank you for
very
coming
much.
onto this channel.
Appreciate it.
I just want to wish you well. I love your ambition. I love your passion and drive. I love the fact that you mentioned that element of owning the situation that you're in, the experiences and networks, and your upbringing has really shaped that as well. And your passion for football. I think there's a clear intrinsic drive to help people, help develop people, help football clubs, etc. So I just want to wish you the best with that, and good luck in the future, whether that's in England, Scotland, India maybe.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot for having me on. I've loved it.